Italian Wine Podcast. Chin Chin with Italian wine people.
Hello, this is the Italian Wine Podcast with me, Monty Waldin. My guest today is Ned Goodwin, Master of Wine. Welcome.
Thank you, Monty.
Where are you speaking to us from? Are you on Bondi Beach or something near Sydney?
Well, I'm not quite on Bondi Beach, but I'm out of the surf as of about 40 minutes ago, and I'm speaking to you from my apartment, which is about 250 meters up the hill from the sand.
Okay, so what is Bondi Beach like at this time of the year? We're in what are we in? We're in late September.
Well, Sydney is already unseasonably warm, so it's pretty hectic. It's busy. Lots of Italians.
Are you a surfer dude as well, or not? Or are you just like walking up?
I am. No. I've surfed all my life, so I surf every day. As a matter of discipline, even if the waves aren't particularly good, and they're not particularly good at the moment. I mean, it's beautiful. It's offshore winds and very blue, and the water is turquoise clear, but not many waves. 3 days ago there were waves. The last few days there have been no waves.
And I guess the water's relatively warm, is it? Or
well, I mean, Sydney siders think 19 degrees and the water is cold. That's what it is about now. But I mean, midsummer it heats up to about 24. So I suppose, relatively speaking, 19 compared to 24 is a bit chilly. But for a European, when I say European, for certain Europeans, particularly in the north or North Americans, 19 degrees Celsius is not particularly cold at all.
So how about we're doing this interview during the COVID pandemic. What are the COVID or anti-COVID measures like in your part of Australia?
Well, when I say my part of Australia, I'll just bring Melbourne into play, even though it's a 14-hour or 12-hour drive away. They're coming out of, I think, what were the most stringent COVID restrictions on the planet. Around about now, I think next week, things are finally going to free up from level 4. But Sydney has been far more fortunate. We've had restaurants and bars and beaches and public recreational areas open for, my God, Monty, everything is such a blur in this era. I can remember what I do, but I can't particularly place when the major events, like when Bondi Beach opened, for example, when they were. But I think it was back in April, May that Bondi was closed, and then from about June, we've been open, and subsequent to that, we sort of had 10-person maximum restrictions in bars and restaurants, which obviously wasn't particularly financially viable for many places, particularly in Australia where labour costs are very high. But subsequent to that, we're now at gatherings of 100. So things are, in the grand scheme of things are relatively lenient. New South Wales, which is the state that Sydney is in, has no longer any new COVID cases. So things are on the up, but who knows? Things could obviously change on a whim.
Now, you're a master of wine, and you're one of the few masters of wine in Asia and the first in Japan. How is it that you have an Australian accent and you have this strong link with Japan? And you were born in London as well, weren't you? So.
Yeah, I was born in London, but aside from the convenience of a European passport, it's not really part of my gestalt, I suppose. I was brought up in Bondi, and subsequent to that, I spent an exchange student year from the age of 15 to 16 in rural mountainous Japan, which really became the platform for things Japanese related thereafter. So after education in Paris, among other places, I was offered a job to go back to Japan, and I did. And I thought this was in the early 2000s. And I thought that job, which was buying wine for a very large restaurant consortium to the tune of around 65 restaurants throughout Japan, but mostly Tokyo-centric, I thought I would stay for around a year or two. And lo and behold, I ended up staying for 14 years. So that's how that fitted in. But I had a pass for the place prior. So things Japanese, lingually, culturally, etc., weren't completely foreign to me as they are or would be to many. So that's how it all sort of fitted in. And then after 14 years, I wanted to bring my children and family back to Australia. I suppose I missed blue sky and nature and clear water and so forth. And so we did, and that was 6 years ago come November, so verging on 6 years ago now.
But why Japan? Why not? I know you mentioned Europe, but why did you choose to get a job in Japan? I mean, did you speak Japanese before you went there, or?
I did. I spoke pretty good Japanese after, firstly, my year with. Sorry, I should have extrapolated a bit more. That exchange student year that saw me in rural mountainous Japan also saw me living with a Japanese family and going to high school there. And when I say high school, I wasn't going to any sort of international school. I was going to the local high school. So that it was a sort of sink and swim type dynamic, which allowed me, I suppose, to discover this sort of inner reservoir of discipline that I never knew I had. And I've drawn on that across many other challenges, including the Master of Wine. But it was during that year that I learned competent Japanese. And then for many years thereafter, I was working as a Japanese-speaking tour guide from Sydney to Paris to not only make money to put myself through my studies, but also to continue with my Japanese studies and regular practice. So by the time I went there in 2002, I was coming from New York at the time. I'd been a sommelier at a place called Veritas there, and I was offered a job in Japan. So I was curious, A, to go back, but also quite eager to venture back into the cultural and lingual studies of things Japanese. But I did have good Japanese prior to going, yes.
So your career, I mean, how did your career as a sommelier, where did that start initially?
That started in Paris. So I was studying art history at university there, and I was on a scholarship, but that paid for my studies, but not my rent and food, obviously. So I worked in various wine bars, and I suppose the wine bar that would strike a chord with you in particular being English was Les Juvenils with Tim Johnson. And I worked a couple of shifts at Willie's as well. So that is where that started. I don't know if you could really call me a sommelier. Prior to that, I'd had some wine retail experience in Sydney. But that at least was my first sort of forage into wine bars, restaurants, etc. And I left Paris following a woman at the time to go to New York. And it was really in New York that I started working more extensively in finer dining and made my way across a number of restaurants. Went across country to Los Angeles simply because I wanted to drive across country, and I thought, coming from Sydney, surf and sun. And I ended up staying in LA for almost 2 years. And it was there, in fact, that I took on my first official sommelier cum wine directorship at a restaurant called Michael's in Santa Monica. And after Michael's, I went back to New York, driving a different route this time across country, and succeeded in acquiring a job at a place called Veritas, which in its day, I suppose, was purportedly the finest wine-listed restaurant on the planet. And that sounds like hyperbole, particularly now, but thinking back to that wine list, I've certainly seen nothing since that comes close. So that is where I sort of reached the zenith of the sommelier world, I suppose. And I was wondering what to do after that. I certainly wanted to somehow liberate myself from hospitality, not a particularly lucrative nor healthy career. And when I was offered this role in Japan, while it was in and around restaurants, I wasn't on the floor. And it also offered me a more of an international scope in terms of buying opportunities. Vinitaly, Provine, En Primeur, Grand Jour de Bourgogne, etc., were sort of regular jaunts of mine. And that was not only an interesting job that saw me in a buying educational role, but it was also a job that allowed me to extricate myself from hospitality, defined as being a sommelier on a restaurant floor, which was my goal after, I don't know, almost 10 years of doing it.
It's interesting that you've got your arty side and your numbers side. I mean, the business side, we'll probably get onto a little bit more of that in detail. I think you've got that sort of both sides of your brain are working, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah, interesting. I would certainly say my arty side is probably the more intuitive and the one that I naturally lean toward. The numbers side is something that I have to is sort of cognizantly pay attention to and learn all the time, because it's not a natural strength nor really a natural interest of mine, aside from the fact that you've got to know it.
Okay, so go on, you carry on with your story. What was the next step then?
Oh well, so yeah, New York to Tokyo, and then close to 14 years in Tokyo, and then back to Sydney. So that's really that sums it up. And subsequent to that, I'm back in the hearth, or back at the hearth. I'm living almost directly across the road from the apartment that I grew up in as a kid, which was not strategic. It's just the way things have played out.
So let's talk about Italian wine. What are your particular favourite regions or styles?
Yeah, look, I really like the Piedmont, and I like more traditional producers. Although the discussion about the sort of Barraquista modern producers and those who are traditional, I think, is a bit archaic now. Things have shifted from the extremes, and there are a lot of people sort of plying their wares on a very fine line of diplomacy somewhere on either side.
Well, I would never have had you down as a classicist. I would have thought, I just thought you were just going to the kind of, the Somme, the kind of modern wines, and it's great to hear that you're just in the other camp.
As I stare across my room at an empty bottle of Biondi Santi Reserva 2012. But Tuscany, as beautiful as it is, I suppose I should be, flying the flag. But it's not necessarily one of my favourite regions for wine. Certainly the Piedmont. And
shall I let you into a secret?
What was that, sorry?
Guess where I am at the moment?
You told me, Montalcino, I know.
Oh, right. In Italian, they say memoria like a bradipo morto, which just means I have literally no memory at all. Sorry.
Well, you're no different to me in this, and particularly in this climate. God, it's conducive to having a brain like a sieve. And without naming producers, I also like very much Campagna. I think Aglianico is a fantastic grape. And I also like the white grape varieties from down that way, particularly Fiano, but a strong affection for Greco. And to some extent, simply because I love Naples, and I've got memories that are very fond and nostalgic, I suppose, that see me walking out of some cove near Posillipo, barefooted, no shirt, and sort of ambling up to some little joint and sitting down, and as I put my shirt on, ordering a flask of Falangina and necking the thing. So I like that neck of the woods, and other grape varieties that I'm very fond of that I would sort of place in my Italian top 4 or 5. Verdicchio from the Marche, I think, is a wonderful grape for all sorts of reasons, but largely because of its sheer drinkability.
Yeah, and it's ageable and underpriced as well. I think still, it's a real bargain.
And I think also it challenges the notion, or the classic definition, the master of wine and W. Set definition of what constitutes a fine wine. I mean, it is ageable to an extent, but I think in this day and age, particularly with organic biodynamic and natural, the idiom of natural wine becoming so influential, is a fine wine necessarily a wine that has the constitution to age for a long time? And I don't know. It's a rhetorical question, I suppose, but it's certainly one to think about, because Verdicchio does have the capacity to age, but I like it in its sort of jubilant youth, as I do Greco and Fiano. And the other great variety, I suppose I left out of my top 5 white varieties anyway, indigenous Italians, would be Vermentino. And fan perhaps more of the Pigato iteration of Vermentino than I am of the more oily, powerful Sardinian expressions. But great grape as well.
Mm-hmm. And any other grapes? So what about some reds? Some of your favorite red varieties?
Well, aside from Nebbiolo, and I'll stick in the Piedmont for a while, but I've become rather fond of Grignolino. It's delicious.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I like it. I like the I like the juxtaposition between its sort of light red fruited shade and then these rather ferocious tannins. It's interesting. It's sort of like the chiaroscuro of perceivably easygoing grapes that actually have a rather serious grunt to them. Other than that, I like Refosco, probably because of its gulpability and that savory, peppery edge. I like Cannonau, I suppose, because, or maybe I'm sort of translating my affection for Southern Rhone Grenache into an affection for Cannonau. But no, I do like it. And I should be saying Sangiovese, shouldn't I? Of course, I like Sangiovese, and I'm sure I've left. Oh well, what else? How can I? I've already said Aglianico and the Campanian things. Piede Rosso is nice too, and one's down there, probably for the same reason that Refosco is nice when one is up in Friuli, I've got an affection for Cesenesi because I just love the notion of drinking an indigenous local variety from the Roman hills while in Rome.
That's a good one, yeah.
But it's a very simple wine for the most part, and that's absolutely fine.
If you were going to live in Italy and you could not live on the coast, you had to live in a landlocked area or somewhere in the middle, where would you go?
Oh, that's a tough question. I would probably go to Umbria. Although I didn't mention Sagrantino, so you're probably wondering, or Grichetto, you're probably wondering why I mentioned that. But I like it because it's a sort of more adventurous, rustic version of Tuscany. The varieties are good. It's not too far away from the coast, and it's encroaching. Well, I suppose by definition, it is already in the south, certainly the beginning of the south. So I like the south because I like the warmth and the sunshine and olive oil rather than butter and cream and so forth. And I suppose Umbria has the advantage of I already said not being too far from the coast, but not being too far from Tuscany and a sort of a level of sophisticated affluence rather than the visceral carnal pleasures of Naples, which I love, but I'm not allowed to be on the coast. Plus, I don't like in excess of 60% unemployment in the Camorra. So it's easy to go down there and think how great it would be to live there. But living there, I'm sure, in reality, would be a very different story.
So let's talk about business. So you made the move from the hospitality industry to a corporate job, purchasing wine for a restaurant group in Japan. How did that come about? Was that through the Master of Wine, or was that just through your own?
No, that was because the Master of Wine, in fact, was that took place in terms of my applying to be taken on by the Institute, and then the trials and tribulations of studying and driving the whole thing on my own. That was all in Japan. So that was after the job offer. The job offer came simply because I ran into the Japanese CEO of this vast restaurant group in New York at a wine tasting, and we struck up conversation, and I was speaking in Japanese and obviously working at Veritas at the time, so he was impressed by these credentials and he asked me if I wanted to go back to Japan. And I did leave a bit out of the story because otherwise the story just goes on and on. But what ended up happening, and it was really the catalyst for leaving Veritas when I did, although his job offer was already on the table, I ended up fracturing my wrist. I fell off a high-backed computer roll-away chair, which is obviously a stupid chair to stand up on in the first place. But I was cooking toast under what the Americans call a broiler, which is their term for the grill in an oven. And I forgot that the toast was there. It burnt and set the smoke detector on the roof of this loft in Brooklyn that I was living in at the time wailing. And so spontaneously, I grabbed this chair that I was sitting on, stood on it, and fell from around, I don't know, what's 9 foot? That's what I was told by Americans it would have been. So a couple of meters, I suppose. Yeah, fractured my wrist, and then I had stabilizer bars and pins in my forearm through to my hand, which meant that I could no longer work as a sommelier, which also meant that this guy's job offer was far more attractive than it would have been otherwise. So I took a bit of time in between my leaving Veritas and my going to Tokyo to take on the job. I went and before September 11, because otherwise I wouldn't have been allowed to get on a plane with this walking weapon embedded into my bones. These pins and stabilizer bars, so to speak. I ended up going to Friuli and then down to Naples. Spent a couple of weeks with a friend's family down there, and then my friend and I rented a house in the Languedoc without electricity, powered by a generator, right near Fougères, and stayed there for almost 5 months, at which point my arm had healed. I went back to New York. September 11 had happened while I was in the south of France, and I retrieved my stuff and went to Tokyo, and finally, after this time that this gentleman had kindly allowed me to take, I took on the role of wine director for a company called Global Dining.
And what was the next step?
Well, I thought a couple of years, as I mentioned earlier, and then 14 years later, I finally came here. But the role was good because initially it was a little frustrating. I didn't quite understand the nature of it because it was rather different in reality to what it seemed to be on paper. Given the sheer number of restaurants, I was effectively in charge of accredited sommeliers with the Japan Sommeliers Association, which, for those of you who don't know, has more accredited, well, actually, Japan per se has more accredited sommeliers than any other country in the world, but for Italy, for what that's worth. But I was in charge of sommeliers who were well-versed, and then sort of wine waiters or bringers and takers and restaurant managers who barely knew the difference between a white and red wine, on the other hand, in the more casual tier of this network of 65 restaurants. So it was a lot of there was a variable level of the sort of education that needed to be done, restaurant pending. And after a while, I realized that my chief role, even though on my business card, which the Japanese love to dole out to all and sundry, it's very important to their culture, it said corporate wine director, I realized that my real, chief responsibility anyways, aside from making sure that I was buying wine that was making that company money, was to educate this legion of staff, some of whom were sommeliers and others of whom were 19 years old, fresh out of high school, making barely enough to buy 2 beers in an hour, and who had never tasted wine in their lives. So that was the role. And with that role came, a lot of frustration, but also a great deal of joy and satisfaction to be weaning and, I suppose, nurturing this young brigade of new Japanese wine professionals. And, of course, that's not to say that everyone wanted to be a wine professional, but there were enough among that network of staff across that vast network of restaurants who, I suppose, found my way of I don't like the word educating, but talking about wine infectious and effusive, and went on to become now some of Japan's leading young wine professionals. So that alone was worth the 14 years. And the company funded my Master in Wine Studies. And given that I was obviously buying for such a big group, the samples that I was receiving were, fast and furious, and pretty much in terms of the styles I was getting, they covered the world of wine that I needed to be covering, tasting, and educating myself on vis-a-vis my Master of Wine Studies. So it all worked out rather well, really. And I left, I suppose, because, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to come back to Australia and the lifestyle here, but it wasn't as if I was ready to jettison myself from Japan and come back to the to a Western culture. It was with great, I suppose, indecisiveness that I left Japan. I was unsure whether it was the right move at the time, but at the same time, 14 years is a big chunk of one's life, and I'm happy to be back.
So, was the creation of your label a sort of which is good wine? Was that part of your quotes rehabilitation of going back to Australia, that you had that project to look after then?
No, not at all. It had nothing to do with it. I just had a distributor down, and that wine, by the way, is very Nagoya and that area in and around Nagoya centric. In that the distributor who takes care of that wine is based down there. He was a friend, actually, of Kenichi Ohashi, who was the first Japanese national master of wine, and my mentee. I think Ken passed, 3 years ago or something like that. But either way, it was Ken, pre him becoming a master of wine, who introduced me to this company who wanted sort of an irreverent, an easygoing, eminently drinkable, relatively inexpensive fizz, white and red wine. And I came up with the blend, and we worked together on that. But it's really only sold in that particular part of Japan. It's not sold across Japan. So it really had nothing to do with my as a platform for my coming back here.
Mm-hmm. So any tips for people listening that are thinking of or who are already in the Master of Wine program?
Oh, yes. Be disciplined, even when you think, to state the bleeding obvious, but the level of discipline required is something that you've really got to drum up on your own. No one's going to spoon feed you. And even when you think you've done enough work, you probably haven't. And make sure you study every day. I was studying 2 hours every weekday and then 4 hours each day of a weekend. And obviously that's all highly personal, but I just found that discipline and those hours intrinsic to my sense of having discipline very, very important in terms of getting through it. And of course, there are many other tips I could provide, but that discipline is very important. It's like going to the gym, or swimming 2Ks or whatever you do, or running 10Ks a day. I don't know. People have their own their own shtick, but the MW is along those lines. You've just got to do it, and you need to do it every day.
As your role as a mentor, not just for the people that you work with, but for students that some of them you've never met before. Obviously, this idea of discipline is one thing. What other tips would you give?
Yeah, look, I've been fortunate enough to have known and to know most of my, if not all of my mentees, but it's important to be highly organized as well. Coming from a sommelier background, I created notebooks in and around grape varieties that I thought had physiological and or stylistic synergies. For example, off the topic of things Italian for a moment, but something like Hunter Valley Semillon, which is this idiosyncratic wine that virtually nobody drinks even here in Australia, albeit it's perceived or considered to be this inimitable quintessential Australian white wine. And when it's young, it's like battery acid. It has very little personality. The alcohol sort of defies external perceptions of Australia, and that the alcohol is traditionally somewhere in the vicinity of 10.5 to 11.5%. And these wines see no oak, yet after around 8 years, miraculously, they sort of transform themselves into these incredibly complex, long-lived wines that then, after about 15 years, become quite profound. And so I took a wine like that, and in my world of creating these stylistic synergies, particularly Hunter Valley when it's young, or Hunter Valley Semillon when it's young, it resembles Muscadet, at least as far as any wine in the world resembles Muscadet. I suppose you could argue that fairly anodyne Trebbiano could resemble Muscadet as well, but not quite, in that Muscadet's alcohol level is almost identical to Hunter Semillon. The only complexity in its youth that it has is usually lees-derived, as is Hunter Semillon. There's no oak, or at least for the most part, on either styles. And they're high acid wines, even though Semillon as a grape physiologically is not a particularly high acid grape variety. The way it's managed in the Hunter, meaning picked early to mitigate the threat of early to midsummer rains, means that it is high acid. So, there are these. The other obvious one would be Nebbiolo and Pinot Noir, and to some extent Grenache, particularly when it's not from a modernist producer who's using too much oak over extracting, and particularly Grenache along the lines of Chateau Reyes, which, of course, I would love to drink more than I can, particularly with a bit of age. So there are these sort of, holy triumvirates of varieties like those three that have they have many similarities. And the reason I came up with these notebooks covering all of these possible synergies that I could is simply to facilitate my prowess when it came to blind tasting. And then if I thought I knew what something was, but I was unsure, and rather than sit on the fence, I was able to get to what it was through the process of elimination. In other words, eliminating what it wasn't, based on my creating these highly personalized, albeit very useful, books dedicated to these, what I call these stylistic synergies across the world of grapes. So, whether that's the right way or wrong way, I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is that I was pretty organized, at least in terms of my world of organization. And I'm sure that other people would approach it in a different way. But it's important to, do the work and be, I mentioned discipline, sure, but highly organized in terms of what is going to work for you and working it out. Because again, no one is going to tell you how to do it. People can only give you hints and suggest various passages through what is a minefield of so-called compulsory reading and articles and suggestions and naysayers and overly optimistic people as well. So it does require a great deal of organizational skill.
Yeah, it's very interesting hearing you talking about giving yourself a strategy, and then when we just said about your professional career, your career has been a mix of serendipity and strategy. So you've got a fascinating story.
Well, thank you, Monty. I like that. I'm going to plagiarize that. Serendipity, strategy.
Yeah, you can. No, but you do though. You travel all over the place. And the cultures that you've lived in have obviously informed your view, and that you have a very global outlook. But you're great on the minutiae of the detail of what's going on. So anybody who wants to study wine or the MW, you're a great person to get to know, that's for sure. And I just want to say thank you for being such a fantastic guest. Yeah, it's been entertaining, but educational as well. I've learned a lot from what you've been saying today. And I hope one day we meet face to face. A real pleasure.
I hope we meet again, and wishing you all the best over your way. Warm wishes from afar. Thanks, Monty. Bye-bye to you, and thanks, Luke.
If you're in Monty, let me know, okay?
I will do. Thanks, man. Bye-bye to you.
Bye, mate.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, chin chin.
I mean, I think your technique needs a bit of perfecting. I don't know if you're going to go side to side or long to long, but you need to speed it up a little bit, mate.
All right, hold on, bear with me. I'm just sucking the cord back into the menu.
If you got to clean the loo or the shower, just it's okay.
All righty.
We could do a show about home maintenance in the era of COVID. But if you want to take some pictures of your vacuum cleaner, and so that's just do so and we can use them in the publicity.
No, not really. I was strategizing, finishing just on time, which is pretty much what I've done. So good.